Well, Tony, what a story, what a journey. Where did it begin for you? This is the main thing I want to know.
It began for me with a lunch with your father over in Arthur Street in the old building there. And I was totally disaffected with the public service, the Commonwealth Public Service, and I wanted a job in Sydney and I wanted to get in the private sector, and I had lunch with your dad. And it was the turning point of my life. It was the best lunch I've ever had, and the best move I ever had, because after the lunch your dad said, "Well, Mr. Shepherd, when can you start?" And I said, "Oh, probably a couple of weeks." "Good." And I said to him, "Mr. Belgiorno, what will I do?" "Don't worry, we'll sort that out." "What will be my title?" "Don't worry, I'll look after you." "How much are you going to pay me?" "Don't worry, I'll look after you." And he did. He delivered. So I started, here's somebody from a highly structured public service background joining this growing construction and engineering company, nothing set down in writing, and your father just delivered. And it was the beginning of a very exciting and thoroughly enjoyable experience with the company. And working with your dad was a pure pleasure.
Tony, and your background had to have some relevance to what we were doing.
Yeah,
so
well, look,
why was Dad interested in you?
Yeah, well, look, I think I started in the public service in the supply department of Defence, and I worked mainly in contracting. So I was, I guess, a contracting specialist with an accounting background. And then I'd left there and moved to the Federal Pipeline Authority, which was building the Moomba to Sydney pipeline. And Transfield, I think it was Zinkline, and one of the subsidiaries was doing the pipelining, and had a big claim against us, and I told them they got zipped. So your father's view was, I'd rather have you on this side of the table arguing with somebody like you than have you on the other side of the table arguing against us. So he said, getting somebody like you on side, that's what we need in this company. Yeah. And I think he'd recognised that contracting had changed. I think when they built the AIS plant at Port Kembla, the contract was about 10 pages. And the latest contracts they got from BHP were about 500 pages. So he recognised now that this professionalism in contracting was vital. Yeah.
Okay, so Tony, let's just position this in which part of the last century was this that we were talking about?
Approximately in 79. But from the moment I approached your father to the moment I started work was only about 4 weeks. So it was pretty quick turnaround. But again, your father was one of those people, make a decision, get on with it.
Yeah.
And I love that, as you know, Guido. I mean, that's my style of operation. So I'd met a mentor who, was very much in my own sort of character of just get on with the job and, put everything into the job and the future will take care of itself. Yeah. And it was terrific. It was a great meeting.
We'll come back to this later, because I remember, Tony, you said more than once how really in many ways my father was probably the most important man in your life, mentor in your life. And I'd like to come back to that. But let's talk a little bit more about what you did in Transfield and the transformational work that I observed anyway that you did through Transfield from that sort of rudimentary beginning where we were still developing as a company, had a long way to go, and you participated in helping us get to the most successful ends of contracting you could imagine. So let's talk about some of those projects and what you did.
Well, look, I started off on contract administration, basically, and Transfield was a phenomenal company in terms of delivery on everything, civil engineering, mechanical, electrical, structural. Its delivery was phenomenal because you gave a job to Transfield, it delivered. It never let anything get in the way of delivery. But it wasn't really, I think, in times getting paid fairly for the job it did because it wasn't sophisticated in contracting. So my job was to bring in that level of sophistication. So I was really sort of, in many respects, contract negotiator, claims negotiator and what have you. And we had some heavy-duty clients, then the dreaded Lurgy was one of them, and Krupp was another one, and the Electricity Commission of New South Wales was another one, and so I had to do the negotiations to get fairly paid for the work that we were doing. And that worked out really well. That went really well. And then, but because the company was like that, I started to get involved a little bit in business development because I rather liked that sort of creative side of it. And that went really well. So they just gave me a mandate, well, you go out there, we like this thing about financial engineering being mixed with real engineering to win projects and take on bigger and better jobs, and joint venturing with sophisticated companies like Saipem and what have you. Let's just keep this going. And so that really was the turning point in my career. But again, your father was one of these people who would always say, not why, but why not? Mm. And if he thought you had the capacity to deliver and knew you weren't going to do anything stupid or put the company at risk, he'd get behind it. Yeah. And that's what happened. And we just went going. And I guess we were the first company in Australia that really got into what they call PPPs today because of that attitude.
So let's just stop for a second, and you need to put modesty aside, Tony, really you do, because this is his historical document, and we need to recognise the sort of the strategic transformation that you helped execute or deliver or develop within the company under the leadership of Dad, and then Marco, I suppose, yes, who was the next one who was in that role. And some of the projects, let's talk about, the strategy, then what led to the projects, the acquisitions that we made, and all of that sort of, let's shape that next 10 or 15 years, which was very critical in the history of Transfield, I think. Yeah,
well look, the first one we did was the Marine oil pipeline, and that was a private sector project, but the company that owned the oil and what have you wanted to get an oil line through to Alice Springs and didn't have the finance available. And so we went to ANZ Capel Court, and they put together a package, and we put together a design and construct package with PBM, a pipeline company, to provide a turnkey solution for this pipeline and arrange the finance. So it was a negotiated contract, and it went really well. We delivered it, way ahead of time. We made a good profit out of it. In the end, we did take over PBM and got into the pipeline business as a result of that. And that showed to us, that I think demonstrated to the board and to your father and his partner that this financial engineering was a way of winning high quality work on a negotiated basis and being more or less your own client in many respects. So the next big one after that, of course, was the Sydney Harbour Tunnel. And in that case, we put in a proposal for another bridge crossing, which actually landed in Glebe, so it was never going to work out, or Balmain or somewhere like that. So it was never going to happen. And we got an approach from a small group who had a concept of a tunnel under the harbour paralleling the bridge, and that was just a brilliant solution. And they came in, and we sat upstairs in
100
Arthur Street and looked down on the route, and I thought, this is beautiful. So I rang Obayashi around the corner, what's his name, Matani, and Tony Matani, and said, Tony, come down and have a look at this. Tony had one look at it, he said, we're in. Yeah. So I rang your dad, and I said, Dad, Mr. Belgiorno, we've got to get this one going. Yeah. I reckon this is a cracker. And he said, yep, let's go. He said, I'll talk to the Premier, I'll talk to the Minister, let's get this together into a syndicate, and let's put a real proposal to the government for it. And away we went, Now, we put quite a bit of money into it up front at our own cost and risk, but eventually the government agreed, yes, if you can satisfy these criteria, the job is yours.
Yeah. And Kumagai, of course, they brought the technology. They'd done the Hong Kong tunnels.
Exactly.
So we hadn't had that experience. So I think this is one of the very interesting things about the joint venturing that you actually probably pioneered more than anything, which was working with people with compatible skills. Yeah. And that's
look, I think the thing is, the culture of the company had been one of, very self-contained. We do everything else. We don't trust each other. Don't trust anybody else. We only trust each other. But they tested the water on these JVs and found actually they were very good at it if they picked the right partner, the right cultural fit. And if the partner brought something to them that we didn't have. It may be technology, it might be balance sheet, it might be just arms and legs resources. But we picked partners that we were compatible with, and I'd say 99 times out of 100 the joint ventures went really well. In fact, we had a tendency in joint ventures to make more money out of a joint venture than doing it ourselves at the time.
Correct.
Because the discipline of a partner who brought something was always valuable. And that enabled the company to grow, as a private company, to grow very rapidly without having to go into the public listed market or take in a permanent equity partner. So we actually picked partners that suited the particular job rather than sort of tying up with a big outfit and having them forever.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. The relationship with Guy was outstanding. We had
Still have it today.
and still happens
We still have it today.
And they're good. They were great people. They'd done the job. We had Claudio De Berardino as project manager, brilliant. Great project manager. Their guy was just fantastic. He had all the technology. They worked together in a combined office. I don't think we ever had an argument with Guy all through that project. It was on time. It was on budget. It satisfied all of the requirements of the PPP. And it's still, I reckon, one of the best built tunnels in Australia, if not the best.
And I think, when you look about the structure, this structure was unique. We won't go into that now, but it was a unique PPP model, which was never replicated elsewhere. It's a pity because these sort of models are probably the better sharing of risk between government and...
They were. The government took the traffic risk, which was a slam dunk on the Sydney Harbour crossing. So if they'd given us the traffic risk, it would have been a much higher toll. We would have made a lot more money. But this was a great deal for the taxpayer. We took the risk on the design and construction, the long-term operations and maintenance, the insurance, all of that thing, and they actually took the traffic risk.
Correct.
But they got the upside out of that. So it was a great deal.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. And we had a great client in those days. It was the old DMR. They really had the PPP has got partnership as the last word. Well, DMR got the partnership part of that and worked very closely with us to make the project a success. And so that set it up for Transfield. We then went on and did a lot of other projects in rail, in water treatment, in power stations and what have you, railways and what have you. And each of those projects was marked with something which I really like, and that was construction success. They were delivered. Even if they had difficulties, they were always delivered. They always satisfied the functional requirements of the end customer. And we built a great repertoire of skills and partners in the course of that. We had companies like Obayashi, we had companies like Pemis Partners at times, and all these companies.
Bouygues, the French.
Bouygues,
we looked. The French, Transdev.
Transdev, Bouygues, that airport rail link is still one of the great civil engineering projects in the history of Australia. Tremendous project. Yeah, on time, on budget, in very difficult conditions.
Yep.
And we could deliver. We could deliver under that model really well. And the other thing too, we became increasingly sophisticated in being able to manage design and things like that. So, as the design and construction contractor, we were the chief. And we showed that we could, as a company, take that higher level of interest and deliver. And I think that was a great attribute. And of course, out of that, we got our operations and maintenance skills. So we always kept the operations and maintenance in-house. And that was the genesis of Transfield Services, because we had that internal capacity and we could think like an owner and design for the future. And I think that paid off, it still pays off today in terms of the portfolio of Transfield Services itself.
Yeah, it is. Now, of course, when the Sydney Harbour Tunnel was both in its embryonic phase and then finally negotiated and closed, we had the development of the frigates project, right?
Well,
and how do we get into defence?
Well,
so that was a very big call, huh?
Yeah. Well, look, I came from defence essentially. Most of my public service career, starting in the early '60s through to the mid '70s, was in the Department of Defence, effectively, because that's what supply did. And I recognised that again, that our capacity to manage complex projects, to manage design, to manage complicated projects, really suited us a lot for defence type work. And we were used to working in the oil and gas sector, which had the highest standards of quality. So we were quite well placed for that. I remember Paul Salteri and I went down to Canberra in the late 80s, it would have been, and met Kim Beazley, who was Minister for Defence, and he said, look, this Williamstown dockyard in Melbourne is a disaster, is an absolute disaster. We're just not getting delivery. I want to privatise it, which is a brave thing for a Labor Defence Minister to do. And would you be interested? We said, of course we'd be interested. And that really started the whole process going. We did form initially a syndicate with a local Newcastle shipbuilder, and another syndicate actually got control of the dockyard, so we missed out. And your brother Marco, never to be outdone, said, well, let's make an on-market play and get control of the winning bidder. And we did it.
What we thought was going to be the winning bidder, it wasn't at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't at the time, but so we did. We made the on-market play for the winning bidder, and as a result, we inherited this bid for the new Anzac warship. So, I think your dad said to me, "Well, Mr. Shepherd, you've got us into this mess. Now you've got to get us out of it. You better go down to Melbourne and manage this bid for the Anzac warship project." And I said, "Gee, that's 10 frigates. That's a big deal. And what resources I've got? Never mind, you'll work it out when you get there." So I arrived at Williamstown, and there was me, a couple of executives from one of the companies we'd taken over, and a secretary. And that was the start of this bid for the 4.6 billion, I think it turned out.
The biggest ever civil
biggest
project
awarded in Australian history.
Yeah.
And we took it from there. And John White, whom we'd inherited from the companies we took over, he looked after the dockyard. He turned the dockyard around and participated in the bid, and I ran the bid. And we ended up with a team of about a couple of hundred people working in Williamstown, and plus hundreds of subcontractors and suppliers. And we put together a fantastic bid. It was probably one of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Totally integrated. It just blew the Navy and Defence away.
Yeah.
And the project then went really, really well. Again, Transfield can deliver. It delivered all of the ships, full functionality, on time, on budget. I don't think Defence has had a project before or after of that scale that was so successful.
Yeah.
And those ships are still sailing today, and I go out in an Anzac warship every now and then, and I ask the skipper, "How's the ship going?" He's a great little ship, going really well. Yeah, it's getting a little bit old, but it still does the job, that sort of thing. So it's just a great project. But it just showed you the capacity of this company to be inventive, to be creative, but to bring those fundamental engineering and building skills to bear in a complex project and make it happen.
Yeah. So this is now late 80s, this project bidding started. We won the frigate contract in about 88, 89, I think, if I remember.
Like that, yeah.
And delivered them until, well, in fact, until we...
Well, into the 2000s,
right in the 2000s. And we then, of course, split our business with the Salteri family, which we won't go into in this discussion, but that was in 95. So we delivered about 4 ships, I think, in that period, and the Salteris delivered the rest under Tenix. Yeah. So it was a very successful bid. It was a very successful phase of the company, and it really took us to the zenith, I suppose, of where Transfield was in the mid-90s.
It did. It showed just the capacity of this outfit. Then we rolled on from there, we're always a sucker for punishment, to Melbourne City Link. That was an incredibly complex and difficult project, and we did have issues in the construction phase of that, in the design of the tunnel, in those terrible Coot Island silts. That was in the mid-90s, and but again, that project was delivered. It transformed Melbourne. We created Transurban, now a world-scale, publicly listed company with toll roads all over the world. A great contribution to Australia. It was the first fully electronically toll road in the world of that type. It worked. It transformed PPP market in Australia. We had a public listing, great new technology, very complex engineering, and it worked. So couldn't ask for anything more.
When I tell people the story of Transurban and how the name came about, people are incredulous, because it was, if you remember, the M2 bid vehicle, Transurban, which we didn't win, or we didn't even get selected as on the shortlist. And then I pulled it out of the bottom of the drawer and I said, "Why don't we use this vehicle for the Melbourne bid?" He said, "That's a good idea." So that's how Transurban came about.
Well, look, your father never wasted anything.
That's right.
As you know, when you went through that house, he still had stuff. He had tools that he bought out from Italy in the early 50s. He never threw anything out. He never wasted anything. And you inherited that gene. We always recycled, and we were never ever afraid of plagiarising either. If it was a really good idea or design, we'd take it.
Well, you're right. I collect stuff as well. So it's an inherent gene.
It's a genetic thing. Yeah, collectors, great collectors, never waste anything. And I think in your dad's case, it came from living through a depression and a war. He came from a poor family, so everything was valuable, and you never threw it out, and you always recycled whatever you could. And I think it's a It was a good philosophy. It imbued the old Transfield. We were very careful. We were very careful. We didn't waste money and we didn't waste time.
Yep, well, Tony, that was really an extraordinary period. And it didn't finish because, if you remember, you and I worked together in project development, Transfield project development.
We did.
We had almost a decade together where we did all those projects together, and I have to say I personally learnt a huge amount from you. And you are, as my father was to you, been one of my greatest mentors.
Oh, thank you, Guido. Well, I owed it to the family. I owed it to the family. And the other thing, the wonderful thing about your father is, you know, I was a complete Philistine when I joined Transfield. I had no artistic or cultural interests at all. And he introduced me to the arts, and then you introduced me to music as well through the ACO. So it was he wanted rounded executives. He didn't like executives just that. He liked people to be rounder, and he liked people to appreciate the cultural aspects of life, and that was deeply imbued in the company and in its culture. It was a wonderful thing. It was a sort of a contrast to the hard-nosed doing of a construction site through to the fine arts. It was just a wonderful mix. Good food, good wine, all of those things Franco was, you know, introduced me to, so it really opened my eyes. And I also learned a lot in Transfield also about the art of negotiation and the art of reading people and measuring people and what have you. You know, that capacity to put people at ease, to look at the problem from their point of view, come up with a solution that's mutually beneficial, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that was great, and they were great skills. And I think, you know, the thing with my father, who was an educated person when he came here, he had 2 degrees in engineering, but he'd also studied history and art and philosophy and whatever. He understood all that. So when he brought that with him to Australia, he didn't use it in the first few years of his life because he was very busy just conducting his business activities and building Transfield. But then when he had a little bit of opportunity within the company, he used those skills to actually bring, as you say, the arts to the company, and then that exposed Transfield to be very different from every other construction company.
It did. We operated at a different level. You could go to lunch at Transfield and you'll have famous artists and premiers and prime ministers and heads of captains of industry all around the one table enjoying themselves. We had some fabulous lunches in Arthur Street, some fabulous, memorable lunches that you'd just, you know, you store away as special memories with famous artists and famous artistes and politicians and what have you. Yeah. It's just magnificent.
Well, we've kept up that standard. We've had lunches ever since the company was started in the 60s, or actually 50s, and just until the end of this chapter of Transfield, almost 60 years, we've been having lunches in our various offices.
Yeah, and the other thing too was that it was a company which encouraged executives to get out. You know, and I've always believed this too, that an executive that sits in head office and doesn't move around really doesn't know what's going on. Yeah. You've got to get out and kick the tyres. And whenever I visited site with your father or without your father, we always stayed in the camp. We never stayed in the local hotel or any of that stuff. Stay in the camp, have breakfast, lunch and dinner with the boys, have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine after dinner, sit down, talk to the foreman and the workers, find out what's really going on site. You just get a feel for the job then.
You did.
Much better feel. You can get reports in head office, but you really don't know what's going on.
Now, let me turn back to Transfield Services, because this is another seminal period for the company. So in 2001, we listed Transfield Services, May 2001, and this came, as you referred to earlier, the opportunity within the PPPs of actually providing services to our clients or to the projects or the businesses that were formed. And then we had started up a number of these over the years and decided to list it. That was very important, I think, historically for both the company and also the marketplace, because we actually did for the first time bring operations and maintenance services in an organised way and in a sort of...
it's an offering.
An offering. It was an offering, but at scale, which wasn't there before.
Yes. Yeah, well, I think...
Talk about that.
Yeah, I think at that time, after the split of the two families, and, you know, where do we go from here was becoming an issue. Construction was becoming incredibly competitive, and difficult, I might add, and you needed a huge balance sheet to do it. And I'd started working on this concept of, well, what can we do in this operations and maintenance space, coupled with our significant and very valuable infrastructure assets. And so the first go around was, well, we'll list the O&M business and perhaps do the assets separately. But we talked to the CBA, who were our bankers at the time, and they suggested, well, why don't you merge it together and get some scale in your listing? So again, I took that back to you. We were on the board then, and to your father and to your brothers, and we agreed that yes, this would be a thing to go, and Transfield services would be listed, and the family would retain a significant part of it. And I've got to say, it was enormously successful. It was a popular float. It traded well, and the company grew. Now, we had some issues during the GFC, but worked through those as well. But the model was actually proven, and then other companies started to come into the space. But the first 7 or 8 years, when we were the first movers and market leaders, I mean, it was tremendous growth in that company. And those skills that we developed in construction, we applied in operations and maintenance, I think, to great effect.
Yeah, we did. And Tony, of course, your chairmanship of Transfield Services was very critical through those difficult times, and you know, the company reached the zenith, and then with the GFC did get into trouble. But however, the actual business was always a very strong business.
They're always a good model, good long-term contracts, blue chip clients.
Yep,
I mean, if you look
right.
at the list of clients that we had, you know, the BlueScope Steels and the Caltexes and the Mobiles and what have you, these were absolutely blue chip clients. And we became embedded. We developed this culture of being able to be embedded with our client, identify with our client, so that it was almost a seamless relationship. It wasn't a master-servant, contractor-client relationship. It was really a true partnership. We were embedded in their team. And our success was their success and vice versa.
Yeah.
It was a great culture, and I think it still is, and I think that grows today. So yeah, it was a wonderful invention in many respects. And again, we were the world leaders in it. So we transformed naval shipbuilding, we transformed the PPP market, and we transformed the operational services market. We were the market leaders in all of those three areas.
In the world.
In the world.
In the world. But it was actually
in
true.
the world.
Yeah.
In the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Boyd came to see us on the air train, we'd already probably done a lot more PPPs than they'd ever done.
That's right.
And that's the biggest French company, construction company.
Yeah, correct.
So we led. We were market leaders. We're definitely market leaders.
Yeah.
Very inventive, very creative, but always that underlying, we will deliver.
So Tony, let's come back to the arts and the significant influence my father had in that, and particularly with the Biennale, which he really brought as an idea to this country, and it was one of the third Biennale in the world at the time. After was actually the Venice Biennale and Sao Paulo, and then there was Sydney. These were the three big Biennales, and still remain the three big Biennales. Yeah. So tell us about your experience with the Biennale.
Well, the Biennales was just fantastic, and that's probably my true introduction to art, because every 2 years that had come up and we'd all just get so deeply involved in it. And board meetings, you know, would go on and on about the Biennale when we had all these other major issues to deal with, because everybody loved it. And I can remember, you know, going to Franco one time, and there was something particularly controversial in an installation. I said, "The fire squad raided us this morning." He said, "Yes, isn't that great?" Think of the publicity we've got. I just thought the pragmatism was brilliant. Yeah. And so that was just a wonderful thing. And of course we had, in those days, we always had an artist in residence, a sculpture in residence out at Seven Hills at our massive workshop there. This is a workshop, as you know, that could put through 80 to 100,000 tonnes of structural steel a year and galvanise all of it if it needed to be. I mean, it was a phenomenal workshop. And we had an artist in residence out. Then you go out there and there's some hippie sitting down in the canteen eating lunch. What's that doing? Oh, he's out here welding a new. And we had a sculpture park full of this structural steel, which your father loved that stuff. Because that was a mixture of what we did for a living and art. And so he loved that powerful steel structure, sculptures and what have you. And we had a whole field of them out there basically. And It was just terrific. And that was, again, a merger of what we did during the day and what we like to do in an artistic sense, which I thought worked well. And, of course, the people who worked there loved it as well. So all of the workers at Seven Hills were involved as well, because they'd help in lifting and fixing and putting things together. And when the Biennale came around, we'd provide cranes and tradespeople to push stuff around, put it in place, do the wiring and all that stuff. So the whole company was involved and sort of lifted as a result of the biannual event of the Biennale, which was just terrific. It's just great fun. Yeah,
and you know what then happened, of course, is I remember some of our workers, fabricators and whatever, would get the sense that it was okay to actually come up with something. So they'd go and get some scrap and they'd make their own works. And we have works all around the place that are actually of our workers. They weren't artists per se. They were actually
it was incredible. It was incredible. But your father fostered that.
Yeah, he did.
And the culture of the company was one of those. If you're creative and you're inventive, we'll let you have a go. We don't sit on people.
Yeah.
Now, you've still got to do your job.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. But we'll let you do these other things. Yeah. And look, our cook, how many years, Gennaro, our cook, it was a great sculptor, and we used to have, his sculptures all over the office and what have you. And, not too many companies have a company cook that does sculptures on the side as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, you'd argue with your father every week, but I mean, that was part of the charm of the company.
Yeah,
It was look, we worked very hard, Guido. We worked very hard. When I started, we always worked 6 days a week. But it was fun. It was enjoyable work, because you never got this oppressive, why are you doing it this way? Why are we doing this? There's always, how can we get this done better? It was a creative and positive atmosphere. And I think, sometimes modern companies don't have that spirit. And I think that's a big loss. But it was a good, fun place to work in, despite the fact that you had your stresses and strains, and you had to work very hard at times, and, sleepless nights and what have you, but it was always fun. There's always some fun about it.
Yeah, that's true. There's no doubt about it. And good friends have made. You think about the people that we've met through our careers, and we still stay in touch.
My closest friends probably come out of that those years with Transfield. Even to today. So including you.
That's right.
No, it's just great, and it was a culture that I think was quite unique. But the fact that they took on a sort of an Anglo like me and then just merged me into this, it was essentially very Italian culture in some respects. But the company seemed to be able to draw on the best of everybody, if you know what I mean. It was multicultural, but as long as you were, hardworking, intelligent, innovative, and wanted to succeed, you had a place in this. Yeah. And we looked and we also looked after people. That was the other thing. I noticed when people retired from Transfield, they were always looked after. They were treated with respect, always welcomed back into the family, that sort of thing. It's a great model, I think, for a business.
Yeah, it was. And we had many, many different nationalities. Of course, when my father and Salteri set the company up in the 50s, they were predominantly Italian migrants. But then as the company grew, particularly through the 70s and 80s, we had many other nationalities coming to the company. So we had a really big mix of people. And it just turned me to the thought of when we had the Pope come and visit us at our workshop out at Seven Hills. Now, that was an interesting chapter.
That was terrific. That was terrific. That was a fabulous thing. I mean, the Pope's coming. We had Jerry Gleeson, who was one of the leading public servants, organising that, and they needed to have a mass in Western Sydney. And the obvious place to have it was the Transfield workshop. And so 3,000 people sat in the Transfield workshop while the Pope said Mass. And we had, some of us had a lucky enough chance to meet him. And I've still got my safety helmet, which I never use anymore, has still got the papal keys on the side of it, because we had these helmets specially made for the day, and everybody said, no, you can't advertise the company, but there you go. There's the Pope with his hat on with the big Transfield T on the front of it and the papal keys on the side. So
That was very special. That was on the front pages of two of our region, our papers here in Sydney, and you could not ask for a better publicity. Imagine a hard hat with the Transfield T on it, on the Pope, with the papal keys.
It was
and
just
that
perfect.
was front page.
Yeah, I mean, your dad had done that. He'd been told by the papal office not to do it, and he just did it.
He just gave him the helmet. He put it on.
Exactly.
Because you remember, Pope Paul was actually a boilermaker.
He was a boilermaker, and he loved it.
That's
He
right.
did, and he loved that workshop. And he was talking to he was a lovely man, beautiful human being.
Yeah.
He was talking to the workers and,
understood
asking
that.
them what they were doing, and he understood what they were doing.
Yeah.
And the workers got a great boost out of that too.
Yeah.
But that was just typical. That was typical of the fun we had. And I think I took my daughter Lisa to that, and she still remembers it to this day. Yeah.
So she should.
Yeah.
It was really
It's
interesting.
lovely. It was just lovely.
Tony, Walsh Bay. We are actually sitting, for those who are watching this, we are sitting in the apartment at Walsh Bay at 6-7 where Transfield and Mirvac redeveloped the whole precinct.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this wonderful project which you and I had a lot to do with.
Yeah, well look, it was my last major project as an executive, and then post my retirement I was still involved as a director of the joint venture with Mirvac. So it's a very special project from my point of view. And it's one of those projects that, and a bit like the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, you're really sweating at the start because you're spending a lot of money and you're not actually getting anywhere in terms of getting a deal with the government. And I think with Mirvac, we were up over $20 million. That would have been in
Mid-90s.
Late 90s.
Late 90s.
Late 90s, early 2000s. And we still hadn't signed a contract with the government. And your brother was getting particularly worried about this. Oh, let's just cut our losses and get going, and let's get out of here, sort of thing. And you provided tremendous cover and support, and we just kept battling on. And eventually, we got the deal over the line. And I've got to give credit to Bob Carr, and I think Morris Yema was the other one. They really intervened just to say this is rubbish. These two companies can't be dragged around any longer. We've got to actually get on with this redevelopment. And so finally, and John Brogden was the opposition planning spokesperson too at the time, and he supported the legislation which got the project going in the upper house. So that was another great time when perhaps the political parties could cooperate to get something done, which is a stark contrast to the situation we live in today. But anyway, the project got off the ground and away we went. And it was just again, Mirvac, perfect partner. Quality company, good building skills, but terrific marketing skills, good design skills, good people to work with. Bob Hamilton, terrific bloke. It was just a great joint venture. It just went successfully. We provide a lot of the engineering. I mean, this wharf itself was a huge engineering challenge because, the sections were floated in. It's a sort of semi-submersible in many respects, given the car park where it is and across the shore sheds at 6-7. Very technically challenging. Supporting the old wall all the way down Hickson Road. That wall was on timber piers in muck, basically. Had to be supported so it wouldn't fall down into Hickson Road at some time. And so it was a very technically challenging project. Great quality in all of the design and the fit out and finishes. And I can remember Bob Hamilton and I sitting down here in one of the old buildings on the weekends we were selling, and I think we sold the $400 million worth of real estate in 2 weekends, which in those days was a lot of real estate, and it all went out the door. We sold everything we could sell, we sold. It was just a terrific success.
Maybe the price was a bit too low.
Maybe the price was too low. It reminds me a little bit of today. Of course, the market was hot in that era, the early 2000s. It was a pretty hot property market in Sydney, but it was just such a unique offering.
It was.
And I've got friends that bought and they're still here today, and they love living here, and it's just got a wonderful ambience. And
But Tony, I think we should both be proud of the readaptation that we brought to this place, because we utilised old wharves which were basically literally falling into the harbour, and we turned them into and readapted them for a modern use, and people love this area.
Well, have a look at 8-9 where the offices have been. Just a beautiful adaptation. Kept the basic fabric of the wharf, and yet turn it into a modern office, but with all the atmosphere you needed. It looks beautiful, it works, lovely atmosphere, everybody's happy. So I think this is probably one of the best foreshore redevelopments I have ever seen and I've seen them all, most of them in the world. We went all around the world looking at other examples before we even got going on this, and I still think this is by far the best.
Yeah. And the final chapter for me, of course, as the chairman of the Australian Chamber Orchestra, is to have that organisation occupy Pier 2-3, which is designated as an arts.
Well, look, there's a bit of a problem here. I don't want to get too political, but we've completed Pier 2-3 in 2004. We completed the refurbishment of it. It is now 2015, and no permanent use has been found for it by government. So this beautiful, harbour front site close to the bridge has been virtually used as a car park and an occasional event centre for the last 15 years. So it's about time it was turned into the permanent home of the outstanding Australian Chamber Orchestra. So hopefully that's going to happen soon. I'm sick of waiting, but I'll let me know when it happens, because I'll be down here for the celebration.
Well, you'll be the first one on the list.
Yeah.
As an ex-board member of the Australian Chamber Orchestra.
That was another thing that you introduced me to, and that was 3 or 4 years of real pleasure being on the board of the ACO, the wonderful ACO. What a wonder! And congratulations to you, Guido. That's been a phenomenal success. And
thank you, Tony.
You've taken it from a good little organisation, but struggling financially and in every other way, to the most successful cultural organisation in Australia. On any measure.
Thank you.
Technical.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've loved it. I've loved every part of that journey.
Yeah.
All right, so we...
Done?
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. That's good. That's good.